jeunesse. We are redefining youth.
I also became a raw food chef, and there's recipes in here as well. There's before and afters, and so on. And then I went on to write this next book, Raw Knowledge, Enhance the Powers of Your Mind, Body, and Soul, which is more interviews with people, other people who've been eating this way for a very long time. Then I went on to write this book, Healing Inflammatory Bowel Disease. And this book should be called Healing All Disease, actually, because the information in there will help people heal all disease. It exposes doctors and the way they treat people and so on. I think my next book might be called If You Want to Be Healthy, Eliminate Your Doctor. And this is actually the newest version of this book. It just came out 2 days ago. I can't say it's hot off the press because I'm a raw foodist and I can't 108 degrees off the press. But it just came out. It's brand new information. It's a completely new book. And then I had all this information out, and I was traveling all over and teaching, but for some reason people weren't getting it. People were sicker than ever. They would come to my lecture. They'd chuckle every now and then, but they weren't going home and doing it. I wanted them to get this. So I just kept looking for the answer and looking for the answer. And it was about 6 years ago. I was in Michigan giving a lecture, and at the end of the lecture, a fellow came to me and said, "Paul, your book is the second best health book I ever read." And I was curious to know what the first one was, and he said, "Not only will I tell you, I'll give you one on 2 conditions." He said, "The first condition is that before you develop opinion about the book, you read the whole book." I said, "How can I develop an opinion about it unless I read the whole book?" He said, "The next condition is, if you don't like it, you give it back to me, but if you like it, you tell other people about it." I said, "That's fine, give me the book." He gave me the book, and I read the whole book, and I have to agree with him, it's the greatest health book ever written. The book was the Bible. And I found more information about health in that book than any other book ever written. And I was upset. The reason why is because 10 years prior to that, I was sitting in some doctor's office and somebody told me the same thing. And I said no thank you at that time, and I didn't read it. I would have saved myself a lot of time and a lot of money and a lot of pain if I would have read it back then. All this information that took me years to learn about health and nutrition and about what foods are best for the body and when to eat them and how to eat them and other aspects of health, the emotional and spiritual aspects of health, was all there in this one great book. But then I ran into a problem because I started to teach in churches. And to my disappointment, thinking everyone would be healthy in these places because they had this great health book right in their hands, I saw more prayer for the healing of disease than any other topic. And I was like, what is wrong? If these people have such a great health book, how come they're not getting better? And I didn't understand. Then I realized information alone without information and knowledge without action means very little. We can't just know it. We have to take action and carry it out. And that's what people weren't doing. They had the information, but they weren't taking action to follow it. So I said something was really wrong here. So I ended up writing this book, Health According to the Scriptures, which talks about the health message found in the Bible, and it has all these scriptures in here that talk about a lot of the principles we're going to cover today in my new lecture. So I wrote that book, and I was done with writing. I wasn't going to write any more. And my personal story was becoming too long, so I had to stop inventing new things. So then what happened was I started learning the 3 true methods of healing. We're not taking drugs by the doctor, but it was the herbs, the oils, and the prayer. That's what it said in the scriptures, and that's what every health book I've ever read confirmed. The 3 methods of healing are herbs, oils, and prayer. Hippocrates said himself, "Let food be thy medicine." The scriptures say themselves, the medicine is in the herbs. The essential oils that come from the flowers and the herbs, that's the medicine that'll heal us. And the prayer is the greatest thing to heal us, and not only heal us, people always ask me, how can I get my family or my friends to eat this way? I just keep alienating them. Every time I try to tell them what to do, they get more pushed away. And here's my answer. You tell them once and you pray for them many times. That's it. And that works. You tell them one time and pray many times. It's the opposite of what I used to do, and I turned more people off than I could have mentioned about this. So then I was doing all that, and as I started praying, his name kept coming up in my mind. I kept hearing his name over and over again. And then I remembered one morning what that name was from. I had read a health book years prior to that, and it was an excellent health book. It was probably one of the greatest health books I have ever read until I had read the scriptures themselves. And the name that kept coming up in my mind was Arnold Ehret. Has anyone here ever heard of Arnold Ehret? And the name of the book that I read was this book here, probably the greatest name for a book ever written, The Mucusless Diet Healing System. If that's not a great name for a book, I don't know what is. The Mucusless Diet Healing System. And he wrote another book called Rational Fasting. Like there's any other kind of fasting, right? Rational Fasting. And then he has this book. They found this in his manuscript and translated it after he had passed on, The Cause and Cure of All Human Illness. So then he had this book out as well. And Arnold Ehret was a fellow that came from Germany, and as a young man he was very sick in the late 1800s, early 1900s. And he cured himself naturally by following the methods that we're going to talk about today in the principles of this lecture. And he came to the United States to teach everyone about this message as well. And then he wrote these books, and all of his books had something in common. He called it the formula for life. And I am convinced, I call it the formula for health. I am convinced that this formula for health, which is the premise of my new book, which I combine the information found in the scriptures, the information that I received at Hippocrates Health Institute, the information I got from all these other interviews of the people I've interviewed, and to top it all off, the formula for health. I don't care whatever diet is you decide to eat, whether it be 100% raw food diet, a regular diet that has a lot of fruits and vegetables in it, or even if it's a lousy diet. If you follow these principles, your health is going to improve. We're going to talk about the formula for health this evening. But before we get to this formula, I want to talk about what's going to motivate people the most to be healthy. Because I've learned from my doctor that opposites attract. I've learned from my doctor, if you tell somebody to do something, they like to do the opposite. People seem to be interested in the opposite. My doctor was so bad, not only did everything she told me to do have an opposite effect, but even the names of the things she told me to do have an opposite effect. I'll never forget, I was taking a test, the doctor wanted to run some tests on me and everything else. I got to tell this little story here to understand about opposites. The doctor told me we're going to have to take some tests. And remember, I didn't know anything about health and nutrition at that time. And it was the first time in my life I ever heard the words, we're going to have to clean you out. And I didn't know what that meant. I'm thinking, I got health insurance, so it's not going to be a problem. So she hands me this gas tank with nothing in it, except a little powder at the bottom of it. And she said, drink this. First thing she told me was I'm going to have to go on a liquid diet. And I said, I'm not into those fruits and vegetables. She said, no, a liquid diet, according to doctors, was Jell-O, coffee, and all this. I said, no problem with that. So I went on a liquid diet. I said, okay, I'm cleaned out. She said, no, now you got to drink this stuff. Now, you talk about opposites and inappropriate names for things. Not only did this thing clean me out, this drink, but it probably cleaned all the pipes in my bathroom out as well. The name of this drink was the most inappropriate name for a drink and the most deceptive name of anything. It was called Go Lightly. It made me do everything but that. A more appropriate name for this drink would have been Fire in the Hole. So I learned from the doctor that opposites had a lot to way to impact people. So I said, that's it. I want to teach people about health. So how can I teach them about health? Well, I realized the greatest way to teach people about health is teach them about the opposite of what health is. What is the opposite of health? Disease. And I confirmed this as I've been traveling and asking people why they came to a health lecture. People weren't coming to a health lecture to learn about food or nutrition. I found the most motivating reasons people would come to a health lecture, there were three, and diet and nutrition wasn't one of them. The most motivating factor people came to health lecture was, if somebody was sick, how did they get well again? That was the number one factor. If somebody had a disease, how did they get rid of it? The next motivating factor was, if somebody wasn't sick, how did they avoid getting sick? And then the third motivating factor was, how can somebody stay looking young? Now, if somebody could be convinced that diet and nutrition has something to do with accomplishing these goals, it's then they start to look at diet and nutrition. But unfortunately, a majority of people today have been convinced and deceived to believe that they can accomplish these goals without changing their diet. How do I know that? Because when I still go in these fast food places, get it. And to know we have a disease, we have to know how to identify it. And here's where the problem came in. I would ask people, how do we know we have a disease? I would ask people, what is disease? What is disease? Disease is simply another word for discomfort. That's all it is. Disease is another word for discomfort. There's only one disease in today's world, with many different stages. Doctors have given all these stages different names, but there's one disease with many different stages. The final stages are things like cancer, heart attack, strokes, and things like that. But nobody wakes up one morning and suffers from these things without experiencing the beginning stages of disease. What happens is they don't identify the beginning stage of disease, or they ignore it, and it keeps coming back worse and worse and worse. I would ask people, how do you know you have a disease? And the dangerous answer I get would be, I feel. If you're waiting to how you feel to determine you have an illness, chances are you're going to be in the later stages of disease before you even realize something is wrong. Why is that? Because when the body is toxic, it cannot give a true response. When the body is toxic, it'll give a false response. Here's an example. When I was a little kid, I could eat a gallon full of ice cream and not feel sick. Now I can take 1 tablespoon of ice cream and feel sick. The cleaner you become, the truer the response comes, and your body will react to toxic things more appropriately. But when you're toxic, you can eat a lot of bad things, and your body's not going to respond, even though you're creating a lot of damage. So, by waiting how you feel is not the best way to determine that you have a disease. Remember, there's one disease with many different stages. Now, even if you suffer from the final stages, we're not going to focus on them tonight, because I believe if you look at the beginning stages, you never have to worry about the end stages. But even if you suffer from the final stages, something like cancer, understand that the body, as long as it has energy left to overcome the illness, when you start doing something right, even if it's just one little spark of energy, you can overcome any illness. And the amazing thing is, there's no medical test, there's no medical doctor out there that can tell you when the body has no energy left and it cannot come back. This is why I tell people, no matter what anyone tells you, you should never give up trying, because nobody could truly tell you when your body doesn't have enough energy to come back from any illness if you start doing the right things. And if it doesn't have enough energy left, no matter what you do is not going to work. So you might as well just do your best to try and see what happens. Somebody came to me once and said, Paul, my doctor told me I only have 3 months to live. What should I do? I said, you better go find a new doctor. Because the only thing that doctor was using to determine that person had 3 months was every person that doctor has treated with that illness only survived 3 months. That's not a very good track record. You want to go to a doctor that says you have 70, 80, 90 years, not 3 months. Remember, there's no way to accurately tell that. But if we take care of the beginning stages, we don't have to worry about the end stages. Now, if we can't go by how we feel to learn the beginning stages of disease, how can we identify this? How else can we identify we even have a disease? Well, I've been all over the world, and I've met people from many different cultures, and I've interviewed a lot of people and studied this for a long time. And I could tell you, the 2 beginning stages of disease are common just about all over the world. In fact, they're so common, they're happening to children younger and younger today. But people don't believe it because it's happening so much, people just accept it as normal. The 2 beginning signs of disease is laziness and constipation. Laziness and constipation. If somebody told you that these weren't a disease, you've been lied to. As a matter of fact, I know people that are so lazy, they're happy they're constipated, so they don't got to get up and go to the bathroom. That's how bad it's become in today's world. Now, some people want to deny that, but I don't listen to people that are full of something. But that's how bad it's become in today's world. So now we know what disease is. We know how to identify it. We know there's many different stages. Now the question is, what causes disease? Again, there's many different causes to disease. There's emotional causes, there's spiritual causes, but from a physical standpoint, what truly causes disease? And there's 2 things. There's 2 common things. Anywhere in the world, you'll find the same 2 common disease. And it's what most people are doing. That's the scary point. The 2 causes of disease, from a physical standpoint, are overeating and undersleeping. Overeating and undersleeping. In fact, you can't do one without the other. Because when you overeat, you're going to end up undersleeping, because the more food you eat, the more sleep you need. But what do people do when they're getting less sleep? Not more sleep. And they say, what are we supposed to do, stay in bed all day and quit our jobs? No, you need to find out why you need so much sleep to begin with. It's because we're overeating. Understand, sleeping is another word for healing. And when you cut your sleep short, you're cutting your healing short. People are overeating, creating more of a need, more abuse to their body, than they're not giving their body enough healing time. The people I've interviewed in my book, they don't require a lot of sleep because they don't abuse their body on a daily basis 10 times a day by overeating unhealthy food. Overeating and undersleeping is something we have to think about. Now many people tell me they get a lot of sleep. There's a big difference between a lot of sleep and enough sleep. And the majority of people today simply are not getting enough sleep. And the reason why is because they're overeating. Nothing takes more energy from the body than digestion. And if you don't think that's true, think about this. Somebody can eat an apple and run a marathon, but after a Thanksgiving meal they're falling asleep. And don't blame it on the turkey, because I know a lot of people that had turkey, and there's no drug in the turkey that's making people fall asleep. It's overeating on the turkey that makes you fall asleep. Overeating is a problem. We need to do something about that. So to do something about that, we have to think, well, why do we overeat? That would be the obvious question. Why do we overeat? And there's many different factors, but from a physical standpoint, there's one reason we overeat for. We overeat because the food we're eating is low quality. When the food is low quality, even though we're taking that food in our body, if the food doesn't have the nutrients that our body needs, guess what we're going to crave? More food. And if we don't have that information and that knowledge to get something good quality, we continue to eat this low quality food, creating a deficiency in the body, making the body work harder to process it, requiring more sleep. We keep doing that and not knowing what's happening. We could starve ourselves. We could starve ourselves by overeating. And that's what's happening. We need to eat higher quality foods. Now, what is a high quality food? 5 things. Now remember, you don't have to eat 100% according to these 5 things, but the majority of your diet should consist of these things if you want to experience better health. What are these 5 things? Raw, ripe, fresh, organic, and live. Raw, ripe, fresh, organic, and live. These are the 5 things that make a high quality food. Now later we're going to talk about not only the food, but how we eat it, when we eat it, and so on. That also is important. But we're going to look at these 5 things right now. The importance of it. The first one is raw. What is so great about raw food? We hear many different things. But what is so important about raw foods? 2 things. 2 things. Liquid and enzymes. Liquid and enzymes. These are the 2 things that are important. By the way, do you know what the majority of the human body is made up of? Liquid and enzymes. These are the things that are so important in the raw foods. Now first let's look at liquids. The liquid that's in the raw foods are the liquid that has food. It's like swallowing a dry sponge. That sponge is going to come out wet, if it comes out at all. And guess what? Where that liquid is coming from? It's coming from your body. It dehydrates us. The next one is enzymes. The importance of enzymes in the body is it conserves the energy of the body so the body can have that energy for other important functions. Let me give you a simple example of what enzymes do in the body, and maybe you'll understand it better. Picture right here, there was a door to a room with a lock and a key on it. And you wanted something very bad on the other side. There's only 2 ways to get there. One way is to simply take the key, open up the lock, go inside the room and get what you need out of it, using very little energy and stress to do so. Now if you don't have that key, the only other way to get to the other side is to kick and break the nutrients that our body needs to thrive and survive. And when we eat foods without that, foods that are cooked and it's destroyed, what happens is the body becomes dehydrated. There's a great book out called Your Body's Many Cries for Water, which talks about the harmful effects of dehydration. When you're dehydrating, your body has to use more energy and work harder to do every other process it would have had to do if you're hydrated. Now we're going to continue with Arnold Ehret's formula for health. But we must be careful and we must remember to use technology with wisdom, and it could save our life. But if we use it with no wisdom, it can destroy our life by making us lazy, weak, and tired. The formula for health, as I said, came to me when I read this book by Arnold Ehret, The Cause and Cure of Human Illness, which pretty much sums up his other book, The Mucosal Diet Healing System and Rational Fasting. Now, I don't want anyone to get the wrong idea about his book. He talks a lot about some things that have to be translated to today's times. Like, for example, he talks about eating a high fruit diet. We're going to talk about why that's not ideal today to do that. He talks about eating coffee and tea. We're going to talk about why it's not ideal to do that today. But we have to understand, over 100 years ago when he wrote this book, more than 100 years ago, those things weren't the same thing they are today. They've been so manipulated, and they're so much worse for us today than they ever were. But today, his formula for health, the principles of it can still be used for the ideal health for us all. And the formula for health I'm going to give you now, and I invite you all to write it down because it's so important for all of us. The formula for health is this. Power minus obstruction equals vitality. Power minus obstruction equals vitality. Now what in the world does that mean? Power minus obstruction equals vitality. This is what it means. It means health minus disease equals wellness. Health minus disease equals wellness. Now, we might not have control over everything in this life containing to our health, but if we take care of the things we do have control over, we will never have to worry about the minor things that we don't have control over. As long as we have enough health, we don't have to worry about the little disease, and we will be in a state of vitality. As long as we have enough power to get rid of the obstruction, we will be in a state of health. So the key to health is always to have power. But once that obstruction passes that rate of power, and the obstruction becomes more than the power, that's when we suffer from the little stages of disease. And then it comes back worse and worse and worse. The key is to always make sure we have more power than obstruction. Now we start out, we don't have to do many things to be healthy. We have to do a lot of work to get ourselves sick. We have to abuse our bodies tremendously over and over again to end up in a state of disease. Because we start out with a tremendous amount of power, but then when we start letting that obstruction creep in our life, we can get away with it every now and then. Somebody thinks it's amazing that somebody could eat a raw food diet and get better from something like cancer. The real amazing thing is that somebody could eat McDonald's as long as they eat it and not get cancer. The human body is an amazing machine. It will last a long time, as long as it has enough power to do so. But when we start wasting our power, slowly but surely we're leading towards the destruction. Because once our obstruction passes that power, we're in trouble. So here we start off with a tremendous amount of power and very little obstruction in our life. Then we say, well, tonight I'm going to eat something bad. Bam, less power, more obstruction. Then we say, now if that's all we did, we'd still be in a state of health. But then we say, you know what, that was good, I'll do that again. Bam, less power, more obstruction. Then we say, well, tonight I'm going to sleep a little later. I go to sleep late at night because I want to watch something on TV. Bam, less power, more obstruction. As soon as that power is more than, as long as it's more, we'll be healthy. But there will come a point where that obstruction will pass that power, and we will no longer have the power to get rid of the obstruction. So the key to health, and then the